I'll talk a little bit about poetry. I've always liked it. Simple enough to me, just that I like it. People have tried to impose reaction formations on my developmental ideas about poetry. And it's a saga of sorts. Has to do with Kate McFerrin not getting the governor's school scholarship she wanted. My consorting with heavyweights like Balakian and Sinfield. And the way people have to justify themselves in this food fight culture. Do we tolerate this person? Is he genuine? The simple truth is that I just like poetry. Some of the reaction formations that have been imposed on me pertain to things like the role it plays in self representation or the authenticity of my ideas. And one of the problems with people who are in the arts is that they make proclamations that people turn into sacred bumper stickers rather than pronouncements to be entered into discussion concerning. The closest thing I've ever had to a statement that I liked, which could stand on its own, of that sort, is the spirit world is an occupied zone. That's the sort of thing that could be on a movie poster. My shortest poem is Caesar in ennui reclines on nuclear divan. It should be noted that I wrote that before I knew who Donald Trump was in any meaningful political way. I may have seen him in a carousel club 18, watching babes walk by or something. I included in my longest poem the letter. But poetry for me isn't a diversion. For me, I don't really believe in writer's block. I see all that as gestation. Things become wallflowers and sort of stick around in the imagination. And then you assemble them, or you brood on them and they become ideas that represent themselves by cadence and rhyme and tone, choice, word choice, definition. I don't have a complete glossary to my vocabulary, but I enjoy the art of words. I know some of my poems by heart, and when it is suitable, I like to be able to recite them. I know Dover Beach by heart. When I was about 9 years old, 8 years old maybe, I tried to memorize The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And I still remember more than the full first stanza by heart. It struck me as one of the great wonders of human existence, that poem. I came to not embrace some of the things that writers I enjoyed do embrace. I don't really see that as a skirmish. It's just a difference in capabilities. If you want to qualify or quantify those capabilities in terms of point values to your reckoning, that's fine. I mean, I'm not out to change the game structure of the mindset brainwashed and inculcated into the human race at this time in history. I do write protest poems sometimes. It's interesting that the people I protest for have illogically disdained those protest poems, which says something about how the situation evolved and what I've been up against. Seattle, for example, were sort of immersed in self-diversion on the opening night of my reading of Frankenstein's Radiant Night. And so they couldn't even bring themselves to acknowledge that the poem had just been recited. He just sort of stared into space, moved on, trying to airbrush out that time frame. Ironically, Pittsburgh embraced How'd You Do Like an Angel. The Firefly song had been written for a girl who made origami birds in a cafe that I frequented. I never got a chance to read it to her. She was gone when I came home. It took all summer to finish. I walked from Davenport to Tipton. Got a ride home from the sheriff after he put me up in a motel. Went down to the Mississippi River in Davenport and thought of the last line of the Firefly song. In the West, we sometimes say sayonara, the last stand. And Yelp magazine wanted to make recordings in Pittsburgh and told me to come and read too. So I had to write something to go along with the Firefly song, which at that time had been my best poem. I've written one that I think is better since. And so in haste, I came up with How to Do Like an Angel. But all of that work that went into the Firefly song is clearly what made How to Do Like an Angel possible, which was preferred for the final recording of the Yelp tape. I don't know which one I like better. I love them both. They're suitable for representing what I arrive at subconsciously by the idea of nursing poetry as a meaningful art enterprise. I don't really see it through the hair-splitting parochial absolutism of Pope Carl. You know, I'm being house-jacked. It's a weapon of mindsets. It's very sad that mindsets are a casualty of war that we live with. I'm not saying I am picture perfect when it comes to influences by and large. I grew up in this culture and saw many things, was different things at various times in my life. They painted me out to be Zelig, those monsters who tortured me, and they realized that they were going to have problems if my poetry became recognized. And so anytime I got a poem like The Hero appeared in Chinook Coupon book, anytime I got recognition for my writing, they wanted it to be seen as either loading the deck for a washout who was being socially protected by his mother, who was an English teacher, or a dangerous provocation because of a lottery win. Who's rightfully to credit that this materialized, dogs me in a way that has never Balakian or Sinfield. Although I suppose you could find someone, like Waters, for example, to scrape the bottom of the barrel about Sinfield with when it comes to their meanness. I feel that the conditioning that surrounds me has been clearly identified as a two virgins pussy ball game. That's the whole tabula rasa of the Veterans Administration's take on me. And explains their motivation, explanation to themselves when they take things from me. That's clear. And they cherry pick my writing to inflate and weaponize ideas as though it's my doing. I was warned about that. Bob Johnson, a philosopher from Duquesne University, I believe, gave me a book to read about a philosopher, Spinoza, from Italy, who was put on trial because his work was co-opted by a brigade for I don't even know the word for it because it just seems like something that people can do if they want to with anybody's art. But this was a defense line for those who very clearly use their art aggressively in a chain gang warfare called Two Virgins Pussy Ball, in which I was an object lesson. And my just occasionally writing a poem that I share with somebody who admires or appreciates it is seen as a caustic, in your face thing. My protest writing is clearly protest writing. My poetry is clearly poetry. I do have some protest poems, but the poetry itself is just something I love to do. I think that poetry is gorgeous in its own right. I'm not a salesman for it either. I let people know that I write poetry and I share with them when it's part of their burden to be shared with. I don't mean to burden them with it. I just get such joy out of sharing my poetry. Some of the lines don't even make sense to me. I used to, Langston Hughes has a book of poems called I Wonder When I Wander. I used to wonder when I wandered about every madman a utopia and every utopia a madman. Just why does that look so interesting on the page? But doesn't really amount to much. It was early, lines pulling us back as we surge into limitless bounds was like that. Tears fallen as rosy early waters of years comes cheap. And certain things have happened in my life. I had some very admirable girlfriends who I certainly loved as much as I said I did. But I couldn't write poems about them for some reason. When Greta materialized, she stood for something that I had always believed in. And years of cooped up inability to write poems for girls just ended with my ability to even say the word heart for the first time, out loud, and not as though I was hiding something. Heart took shape, and I wrote poem after poem after poem for Greta. Then, of course, I ruminated on all of that. Some of the things that I love about poetry are things that I can't do. And I like to say that the poems I love best and the poet I love most is someone who I'm grateful for all of the teaching I've received about poetry. Because I was able to recognize and listen and feel the appreciation in the spirit of their work. It would be a shame for poetry not to be appreciated. And that's the only reason I do it. Is to show my appreciation for things. The human spirit is clearly in a world of pain right now. It's not just me. I don't know what kind of thought to leave you with. I don't see poetry as a pedagogical tool. Some poetry I like better than other poems. Sometimes I cobble a poem, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I let it stand. Some poems are important to me, some poems less so. And it's not because one is better than the other. Some of the poems that I don't really think are important are considered better poems than ones that I do think are important by other people. It's a normal relativity to the bearing of the art. And personhood involves developing taste. I was reading today about grapes that didn't ripen in an area of Sicily that was close to Ignazio Simoni. And as a result, the wine, which was poor people's wine, consumed by the people who made it, was from unripened berries. And accordingly, it was bitter wine.